Now let us sum up together. Here we read two contrasting approaches to economics. On the left, we find the approach we have covered in class. On the right, we find the macroeconomic approach, both the classical monetarist version and the Keynesian version. So, point number 1. Austrians hold that time plays an essential role, while macroeconomists ignore the influence of time. Point number 2. Austrians view capital as a heterogeneous set of capital goods, which receive constant wear and must be replaced. In contrast, macroeconomists view capital as a homogeneous fund, which reproduces on its own. This is the mythical concept of capital that Baveik and Hayek so criticized in the work of John Bates Clark and Frank Knight. Point 3. According to Austrians, the production process is dynamic. It is divided into multiple, vertical, temporal stages. Meanwhile, according to macroeconomists, the productive structure is in equilibrium. It is one-dimensional and horizontal. Remember the circular flow of income. The temporal stages in the production process are excluded from the analysis. Point number 4. Austrians maintain that money always affects the process and modifies the structure of relative prices. Money exerts a driving force. Please add, money is never neutral. In contrast, macroeconomists maintain that money affects only the general price level. They do not believe monetary injections cause changes in relative prices, since they believe money is neutral. Point 5. Austrians explain macroeconomic phenomena in microeconomic terms. Credit expansion leads to a variation in relative prices, and this triggers the cycle. Meanwhile, macroeconomic aggregates conceal from macroeconomists what is actually happening and prevent them from analyzing underlying microeconomic factors. Point number 6. Austrians hold that the cycle is due to an endogenous cause, that it results from the poor institutional design of the financial system, which permits fractional reserve banks to bring about credit expansion orchestrated by central banks. As you know, this is owing to a simple historical accident, an error in Peel's Bank Act, which failed to require a 100% reserve ratio on deposits, though it did correctly set such a requirement for the issue of paper currency. In contrast, macroeconomists lack a theory of the cycle. Crises are a mystery to them. Keynesians view crises as the result of financial panics. Entrepreneurs suddenly become depressed. Keynes uses the term animal spirits. In other words, one minute I am super optimistic, and the next I am suddenly depressed. A manic-depressive economy. That is the only Keynesian explanation for crises. Financial panics, a shortage of aggregate demand, and a need for higher effective demand. Maybe monetarists are a little more sophisticated. They blame external shocks. Suddenly there is an external shock to oil prices, something external, or there is a monetary squeeze. And as Friedman and Schwartz mistakenly claimed, central banks do not manage to inject the amount of money necessary to avoid deflation, which was misinterpreted to be the cause of the Great Depression. The Great Depression was due to other causes, basically the prior bubble and excessive interventionism, public spending, tax increases, market regulation, rigidification of labor markets, increases in international trade protectionism, etc. So, macroeconomists lack a theory of the cycle, and they attribute cycles to exogenous causes, psychological, technological, or errors in monetary policy. Point 7. If something characterizes the theorists of the Austrian school, it is their elaborate theory of capital. We will not dwell on the essential importance of such a theory. Monetarist theorists lack a theory of capital. Point number 8. Saving. Austrians consider saving to be fundamental. Saving causes a vertical, longitudinal change in the productive structure, making it more productive. In this way, saving facilitates sustainable economic development, which benefits all of us. Meanwhile, unbelievably, macroeconomists do not consider saving to be important. They believe that capital replicates itself laterally, and that the production function is fixed, so they view saving as unnecessary, and any problem that arises can be chalked up to underconsumption. Point number 9. According to Austrians, an inverse relationship exists between the demand for capital goods and the demand for consumer goods. Remember that Robinson Crusoe can invest in his stick, his capital good, only if he has first saved. That is, if he has postponed his immediate consumption, if he has disciplined his behavior, if he has sacrificed and has temporarily decreased his consumption. Note that in contrast, macroeconomists, both Keynesians and monetarists, hold that the demand for capital goods is directly related to the demand for consumer goods. In other words, if you consume more, more is invested. Listen, how can both be possible at the same time? How can we both consume more and invest more, when investing means postponing consumption? Well, believe it or not, that is how the reasoning behind macroeconomic models goes. Point number 10 is important. Austrians always see costs as subjective. A cost is an opportunity cost. It is the subjective value we attach to those ends we give up when we act, and costs follow prices, not the other way around. Well, point 10 from the viewpoint of macroeconomists, production costs are objective, real, and predetermined by the historical cost of producing a good. As we observed, this is the error Keynes makes when he follows classical economists in his definition of the marginal efficiency of capital. We find the corollary in point number 11. Austrians maintain that market prices tend to determine costs. If you think you can sell a hat for 100 euros, you will be willing to incur costs today of up to 80 or 90 euros, but no more. The costs follow the price at which you think you will sell the hat, and not vice versa. Meanwhile, macroeconomists believe that costs determine prices. It is an absurd notion. If costs determine prices, there would be no merit in being an entrepreneur. I would incur costs, add a profit margin, and sell. As easy as that. But that is not the case. It is like the donkey that follows the carrot. The carrot is the price, and the donkey, the costs. Costs follow prices, and not the other way around. In contrast, macroeconomists, whether Chicagoan or Keynesian, see costs as objective, as a discernible piece of historical information, as if cost functions existed and tended to determine prices. This is the case only in their phantasmagorical world of equilibrium and perfect adjustment, in which no changes occur, and there are no entrepreneurs. And point number 12, Austrians consider the interest rate to be a market price determined by subjective valuations of time preference. It is the price of present goods in terms of future goods. The interest rate is used to arrive at the present value of every capital good by discounting its expected future flow of returns. Remember the example I have given several times of renting an apartment. In contrast, macroeconomists maintain that the interest rate is determined by the marginal productivity or efficiency of capital, the internal rate of discount at which each capital good's expected future flow of returns is equal to the historical cost of producing the good. Or, like Keynes, they consider the interest rate to be a short-term, strictly monetary phenomenon. We have outlined two radically different, mutually exclusive approaches to economics. Either we are right and they are totally wrong, or vice versa. And by now, you have all the arguments you need to be confident that we are the ones who are right. An objective, impartial analysis of each school's conceptual framework makes this obvious.